Moonbound Reckoning. Celine Dorn had always felt the pull of the forest, a silent whisper in her blood that she refused to acknowledge. But on the night of the blood moon, the call became unbearable. The wind howled with voices not meant for human ears. The trees bent toward her as if reaching. And then she saw him, a man standing at the tree-line, his golden eyes sharp, his presence undeniable. "You've ignored it long enough," he murmured, stepping closer. "But you can't fight what you are forever." Chapter 1. The Unacknowledged Call of the Wild. The wind that night was different. It wasn't the usual bluster that rattled the windows of Celine Dorn's small cottage, nestled on the outskirts of the sleepy town of Havenwood. This wind carried a melody, a haunting, almost mournful tune that seemed to vibrate deep within her bones. Celine, at 58, had long grown accustomed to the quiet solitude of her life. The townspeople, with their polite nods and averted gazes, had seen to that. They called her the Forest Woman, a whisper that carried both curiosity and a hint of fear. She'd arrived in Havenwood 20 years ago, a refugee from a past she refused to speak of, a past that clung to her like the scent of wood smoke. Celine had built a life for herself, a life of careful routine. She tended her small garden, its herbs and flowers a riot of color against the backdrop of the ancient woods that bordered her property. She sold her remedies and tinctures at the weekly market, her hands weathered and strong, offering silent testament to years of working the earth. Her days were filled with the predictable rhythm of nature, a comforting counterpoint to the chaotic memories that still haunted her dreams. But tonight, the predictability was shattered. The moon, swollen and blood-red, cast an eerie glow over the landscape. Celine felt a restlessness she hadn't experienced in years, a primal urge to run, to disappear into the shadowed depths of the forest. She tried to ignore it, busying herself with brewing a calming chamomile tea, the familiar scent usually a balm to her frayed nerves. But the wind continued its siren song, and the tea tasted like ash in her mouth. She looked out the window, her gaze drawn to the line of ancient oaks and pines that marked the boundary between her carefully cultivated world and the untamed wilderness beyond. The trees seemed to sway in time with the wind, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. It was a beautiful, terrifying sight. Celine had always felt a strange connection to those woods, a sense of belonging that both comforted and frightened her. She'd spent countless hours wandering their paths, finding solace in their quiet embrace. But she always kept a distance, a careful boundary between herself and the deeper, darker heart of the forest. A shiver traced its way down her spine. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was a deeper cold, a feeling of being watched, of being called. She told herself it was just the wind, the strange light of the moon playing tricks on her eyes. But deep down, she knew it was something more. Something ancient and powerful, something that resonated with a part of her she'd long tried to bury. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened window pane. Silver streaked her dark hair, lines etched around her eyes and mouth, a testament to a life lived, a life marked by both joy and sorrow. But her eyes, a deep, forest green, still held a spark of defiance, a refusal to be broken by the weight of her past. She saw a woman who had survived, who had endured, but also a woman who had closed herself off, who had built walls around her heart to protect it from further pain. Suddenly, a movement at the edge of the woods caught her eye. A shadow, tall and imposing, detached itself from the darkness. It moved with a fluid grace that was both animalistic and strangely elegant. Celine's breath caught in her throat. It was a man, or at least he appeared to be. He stood at the tree-line, bathed in the blood-red moonlight, his form silhouetted against the deeper darkness of the forest. He was tall, powerfully built, with shoulders that seemed to stretch forever. His hair, the color of midnight, fell to his shoulders, framing a face that was both harsh and strikingly handsome. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They glowed with an unnatural, golden light, piercing the darkness like twin beacons. They were the eyes of a predator, sharp and intelligent, but also held a hint of something else: sadness? Longing? Celine felt a jolt of fear, a primal instinct to flee. But she couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, her gaze locked with his. It felt as if an invisible thread connected them, pulling her towards him, towards the unknown. He took a step closer, and the wind seemed to whisper his name, though she couldn't quite make it out. It sounded like a sigh, a rustle of leaves, a growl low in the throat. He stopped a few feet from the edge of her garden, his gaze unwavering. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened slightly, losing some of their predatory intensity. "You've ignored it long enough," he murmured, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very air around her. It was a voice that spoke of ancient forests and moonlit nights, of wildness and freedom. It was a voice that resonated deep within her soul. Celine found her voice, though it trembled slightly. "Ignored what?" she asked, trying to sound braver than she felt. He tilted his head slightly, a flicker of amusement in his golden eyes. "The call," he said simply. "The call of your blood, of your heritage. You can't fight what you are forever, Celine." His words struck her like a physical blow. How did he know her name? How did he know about the things she'd spent her entire life trying to deny? She wanted to deny it again, to scream at him to leave, to go back into the darkness from whence he came. But the words wouldn't come. She was trapped, caught between the fear of the unknown and the undeniable pull of something ancient and powerful. The moon above was at its highest point. It cast a bloody and unforgiving judgment upon the world. And something within Celine, something long dormant, began to stir. It was a frightening, yet exhilarating sensation. Chapter 2. Echoes of a Forgotten Past. His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. "What I am," Celine repeated, the question a fragile whisper against the backdrop of the wind's rising howl. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself, a futile attempt to ward off the chill that seeped into her bones. It wasn't just the night air, it was a coldness that emanated from him, from the very idea of what he represented. He studied her for a long moment, his golden eyes seeming to see straight through her carefully constructed defenses, to the vulnerable core she'd hidden from the world for so long. "You know," he said softly, his voice a stark contrast to the wildness of the wind. "Deep down, you've always known." A wave of dizziness washed over Celine. Memories, long suppressed, flickered at the edges of her consciousness. Images of her grandmother, a woman with eyes the same startling green as her own, telling her stories of a people who lived in harmony with the forest, who could shift their forms at will, who ran with the wolves under the moon. Stories Celine had dismissed as folklore, as the ramblings of an old woman clinging to a dying past. "My grandmother's tales," Celine said, her voice barely audible. She used to talk about the loup-garou. The French words, almost forgotten, felt strange on her tongue. Werewolves. The very word sent a shiver of fear and something else, something akin to excitement, down her spine. He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "They weren't just tales, Celine. They were your history, your legacy." He took another step closer, closing the distance between them. She could smell him now, a scent of pine needles and damp earth and something else, something wild and untamed that made her heart pound in her chest. I don't understand," Celine stammered, her mind reeling. "I'm just an ordinary woman." He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Ordinary? You are anything but ordinary, Celine Dorn. You are a daughter of the moon, a child of the forest. You carry the blood of the loup-garou in your veins." He reached out a hand, his fingers long and strong, and for a moment, she thought he was going to touch her. She flinched back, a surge of panic flooding through her. He paused, his hand hovering in the air between them, his eyes questioning. "Don't be afraid," he said softly. "I won't hurt you." His words, meant to be reassuring, only served to heighten her fear. She knew, instinctively, that he was dangerous. Not necessarily to her, not in a physical way, but dangerous to the carefully constructed life she'd built, to the fragile peace she'd found in solitude. He represented everything she'd tried to run away from, everything she'd tried to bury.
"Who are you?"
she asked, her voice trembling. He smiled then, a slow, captivating smile that transformed his face, making him seem almost human. "My name is Lucian," he said. "And I've been waiting for you, Celine."
"For a very long time."
The name resonated with her, a faint echo of something she couldn't quite grasp. It felt both familiar and utterly foreign. She searched his face, trying to find some sign of deception, some hint of malice. But all she saw was a strange mixture of intensity and tenderness. It was a confusing, unsettling combination. "Waiting for me?" she repeated, her voice laced with disbelief.
"Why?"
"Because you're the key," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The key to everything." His words made no sense. She was a woman living a quiet, solitary life. A life far removed from anything that could be considered important, let alone a key. She was about to tell him so, to demand that he leave her alone, when a sudden, sharp pain pierced her head. She gasped, clutching her temples, her vision blurring. Images flashed before her eyes, fragmented and distorted. She saw a forest bathed in moonlight, a pack of wolves running through the trees, a young woman with eyes the same green as her own, laughing as she transformed into a magnificent wolf. She saw fire, destruction, a desperate flight through the darkness. The pain intensified, and she cried out, collapsing to her knees. Lucian was instantly beside her, his strong arms catching her before she hit the ground. He held her close, his body radiating a warmth that seemed to seep into her very bones, easing the pain slightly. "What's happening to me?" she whispered, her voice weak and trembling. "It's the awakening," he said, his voice close to her ear. "Your blood is remembering. Your true self is emerging." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. His face was close to hers, his golden eyes filled with a concern that seemed genuine. She felt a strange connection to him, a pull that defied logic and reason. It was as if a part of her recognized him, a part of her that had been dormant for years, now awakened by his presence, by the blood moon hanging heavy in the sky. The pain began to subside, leaving her feeling weak and disoriented. She leaned against him, her body trembling, her mind struggling to make sense of what was happening. She was Celine Dorn, a woman who had sought refuge in solitude, who had built a life of quiet routine. But now, everything she thought she knew about herself, about her past, was being challenged. He held to her tightly. "It is all right, Celine," he whispered near her ear. His breath felt so warm, yet she shivered, feeling the cold of the wind.
"Breathe." She did.
She closed her eyes and tried to settle herself. As the pain subsided, a chilling realization dawned. The stories, the whispers, the pull of the forest, it wasn't madness. It was real, and she was a part of it, a terrifying, exhilarating, undeniable part of it. Chapter 3. The Scent of Pine and Wolf. The scent enveloped her first, a heady mix of damp earth, crushed pine needles, and something undeniably animal. It was a scent that bypassed her conscious mind, speaking directly to something primal deep within her. It was the scent of Lucian, and it was both terrifying and strangely intoxicating. Celine, still cradled in his arms, felt her body betraying her carefully constructed defenses. The trembling hadn't stopped, but now it was mingled with a different kind of tremor, a faint, almost imperceptible hum of awareness. He held her gently, his strength a comforting presence against the lingering echoes of the pain that had racked her. His warmth seeped through her clothes, chasing away the chill of the night, and for a moment, she allowed herself to simply be held, to surrender to the feeling of safety he offered. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, a feeling she'd almost forgotten existed. "Better?" he asked, his voice a low rumble against her ear. She nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight with a mixture of fear and something else. Something she couldn't quite name. She tilted her head back, looking up at him, her eyes searching his. The golden glow had faded slightly, replaced by a more human warmth, but the intensity remained. He was studying her, his gaze unwavering, as if trying to decipher the secrets hidden within her. What was that? She finally managed to ask, her voice hoarse. The memories, he said softly. Your heritage, it's fighting to surface. It's been suppressed for too long. She pulled back slightly, a flicker of her old defiance returning. Suppressed? I chose to forget. Those were just stories. He shook his head, his dark hair brushing against her cheek. They were more than stories, Celine. They were a warning. A way to protect you. Protect me from what? She challenged, her voice gaining strength. His gaze shifted, looking out towards the dark woods that loomed behind them. From those who would hunt us. From those who fear what they don't understand. The words sent a shiver down her spine. She'd heard whispers in Havenwood, rumors of strange disappearances, of unexplained animal attacks. She'd always dismissed them as the product of overactive imaginations, of small-town paranoia. But now, looking into Lucian's eyes, she knew they were more than just rumors. Hunters? She whispered. He nodded. They've been around for centuries. Driven by fear and hatred. They believe we're monsters, abominations. They hunt us relentlessly. Celine felt a cold knot of fear tighten in her stomach. She thought of the peaceful life she'd built, the quiet solitude she'd cherished. It was all a facade, a fragile illusion that could be shattered in an instant. But I've lived here for 20 years, she said. No one has ever. They know you're here, Lucian interrupted, his voice grim. They've been watching. Waiting. Waiting for what?
For you to awaken, he said.
For the blood moon. It strengthens us, makes us more visible. Celine looked up at the crimson moon hanging heavy in the sky. It seemed to pulse with an eerie light, casting long, distorted shadows across the landscape. She'd always found the blood moon unsettling, but now it felt like a beacon, a signal to those who would hunt her. So, what happens now? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lucian's gaze returned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and something else. Something that made her heart beat faster. Now, he said, you have a choice. You can continue to deny what you are, to live in fear, waiting for them to come for you. Or you can embrace your heritage. You can learn to control your power, to protect yourself. And you can teach me? She asked, the words hesitant, unsure. He nodded. I can. But it won't be easy. It will be dangerous. It will change everything. The thought of change terrified her. She'd spent years building a life of stability, of predictability. The idea of throwing that all away, of embracing a world of danger and uncertainty, was almost unbearable. But there was another part of her, a part that had been awakened by the blood moon, by Lucian's presence, that craved that change. A part of her that longed to run wild and free, to embrace the power that flowed through her veins. She looked into his eyes, searching for some sign of deception, some hint of ulterior motive. But all she saw was a sincerity that was both unsettling and strangely compelling. She felt a connection to him, a bond that transcended logic and reason. It was as if her soul recognized his, as if they were two halves of a whole, finally reunited after centuries of separation. She began, her voice trembling. I don't know what to do. He smiled then, a gentle, reassuring smile that reached his eyes. You don't have to decide tonight, he said. But I'll be here. When you're ready. He gently helped her to her feet, his touch sending a jolt of awareness through her. She stood there for a moment, swaying slightly, her mind reeling. The world she thought she knew had been turned upside down. The quiet, solitary life she'd built was a lie. And she was standing on the precipice of a choice that would change everything. The wind picked up, it played with Lucian's hair. And Celine felt, for the first time in decades, not alone. She was terrified, yes, but not alone. He took a step back, as if sensing the turmoil within. He held her gaze. Something in his eyes reassured her. Then, with a final, lingering look, he turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest, leaving her alone under the blood-red glow of the moon. The scent of pine and wolf lingered long after he was gone. Chapter 4. A dance of fear and fascination. The The silence that followed Lucian's departure was almost deafening. The wind, which had been howling moments before, seemed to hold its breath, leaving Celine alone with the frantic beat of her own heart and the echoing whisper of his words. She stood there, rooted to the spot, the scent of pine and wolf still clinging to the air, a tangible reminder of the encounter that had shattered her carefully constructed reality. She looked towards the forest, the dark trees now seeming to watch her, their branches swaying gently in the night breeze. He was gone, vanished as quickly and silently as he had appeared. But his presence lingered, a palpable energy that hummed in the air around her. Slowly, her legs carried her back towards the cottage, each step heavy with the weight of her newfound knowledge. The familiar sanctuary of her home, with its worn wooden floors and the scent of dried herbs hanging in the air, felt strangely foreign now, as if she were seeing it through new eyes. She lit a single candle, its flickering flame casting dancing shadows on the walls. The small, cozy room, which had always been her refuge, now felt like a cage. She paced restlessly, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Fear warred with fascination, denial with a burgeoning sense of acceptance. She thought of Lucian, of his golden eyes and the strange mixture of wildness and tenderness she'd seen in them. He was dangerous, she knew that instinctively, but he was also captivating. He represented everything she'd tried to run away from, but he also held the key to understanding the part of herself she'd long suppressed. She remembered the stories her grandmother had told her, the tales of the loup-garou, of their connection to the moon and the forest, of their ability to shift their forms at will. She dismissed them as folklore, as the fantasies of an old woman clinging to a dying past. But now, she knew they were real. And she was a part of that reality, whether she liked it or not. She stopped in front of a small, antique mirror that hung on the wall, its silvered surface reflecting her image back at her. She looked at herself, really looked, for the first time in years. She saw the lines of age and experience etched on her face, the silver streaks in her dark hair. But she also saw something else. A spark of wildness in her eyes, a flicker of something ancient and powerful that had been dormant for too long. She touched her reflection, her fingers tracing the contours of her face. She felt a strange connection to the woman staring back at her, a sense of recognition, of understanding. It was as if she were finally seeing her true self, the self she'd hidden away for so long. A sudden wave of exhaustion washed over her. The adrenaline that had been coursing through her veins began to fade, leaving her feeling drained and weak. She sank into a worn armchair, her body trembling, her mind still reeling. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the images that flashed before her. Lucian's face, the blood moon, the dark forest, the fragmented memories of her grandmother's stories. But they persisted, swirling around her, refusing to be ignored. She knew she couldn't go back to her old life, to the blissful ignorance she'd lived in for so long. Lucian had shattered that illusion, had awakened something within her that could no longer be denied. She had a choice to make, a choice between fear and freedom, between denial and acceptance. But she was tired, so very tired. She needed time to think, to process everything that had happened. She drifted off to sleep in the armchair, the flickering candlelight casting dancing shadows on the walls, her dreams filled with the scent of pine and wolf, and the haunting image of golden eyes watching her from the darkness. When she awoke, the first rays of dawn were creeping through the window, painting the sky with soft hues of pink and orange. The blood moon was gone, replaced by the pale, gentle light of the morning sun. The world seemed almost normal again, as if the events of the previous night had been nothing more than a dream. But the scent of pine and wolf still lingered in the air, a faint but persistent reminder of the encounter that had changed everything. And as Celine looked out the window towards the forest, she knew that her life would never be the same again. A small, almost invisible smile crept onto her lips. She felt different. She would need to face this. She would. But first, coffee. She stretched and started to move. She noticed something on the floor, near where Lucian had stood. A single, dark wolf's hair, glinting in the morning light. She picked it up, holding it between her fingers, its texture both coarse and strangely soft. A tangible proof that she hadn't imagined at all. Chapter 5. Whispers in the blood moon's light. The wolf's hair. It felt strangely warm in Celine's palm, a tiny, tangible link to the night's extraordinary events, a stark contrast to the mundane routine of brewing her morning coffee. The aroma, usually so comforting, seemed almost too ordinary, a jarring disconnect from the wildness that had bloomed within her. She found herself glancing at the window, half expecting to see Lucian standing there, a silhouette against the brightening sky. But the garden was empty, save for the dew-kissed flowers and the silent sentinels of the trees beyond. She ate a simple breakfast of toast and honey, her appetite surprisingly robust despite the turmoil in her mind. The food tasted richer, the colors of the flowers in her small vase seemed more vibrant. It was as if all her senses had been heightened, sharpened by the previous night's awakening. After breakfast, she decided to visit the forest. Not the deep, dark heart of it, but the familiar paths she'd walked for years, the ones that bordered her property. She needed to feel the earth beneath her feet, to breathe the air that Lucian breathed, to try to make sense of the whirlwind that had swept through her life. She stepped outside, the morning air cool and crisp against her skin. The sun was climbing higher, casting long shadows across the dew-covered grass. She followed a narrow path that wound its way through the trees, her senses on high alert. Every rustle of leaves, every chirp of a bird, seemed to carry a hidden meaning. She found herself searching for signs of Lucian, for some trace of his passage. A broken twig, a footprint in the soft earth. But the forest remained silent, revealing nothing. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, a creature of myth and shadow. She reached a small clearing, a place she often came to meditate, to find solace in the quiet beauty of nature. A moss-covered rock served as her seat, and she sat down, closing her eyes, taking a deep breath. The scent of pine and earth filled her lungs, calming her racing heart. She opened her eyes, her gaze drawn to the towering trees that surrounded her. They seemed to whisper secrets, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. She remembered her grandmother's stories, the tales of the loup-garou, of their connection to the forest, to the moon. "Grandmere," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What am I supposed to do?" As if in answer, a faint breeze stirred the leaves, creating a rustling sound that seemed to mimic a sigh. Celine felt a sudden chill, despite the warmth of the sun. She looked around, her heart pounding in her chest. She was alone, she knew that. But she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being surrounded by unseen presences. She remembered Lucian's words. "They've been watching, waiting." A shiver of fear ran down her spine. Were they watching her now, the hunters he had spoken of? Or were there other watchers, other beings who inhabited this ancient forest, beings who were neither human nor wolf? She stood up, her senses on high alert. She scanned the trees, her eyes searching for any sign of movement. But the forest remained silent, revealing nothing. She started to walk back towards her cottage, her pace quickening with each step. She felt a growing sense of unease, a primal instinct to flee. As she neared the edge of the woods, she heard a sound, a low growl, coming from the shadows of the trees. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She strained her eyes, trying to pierce the darkness. A pair of golden eyes materialized from the shadows, glowing with an unnatural light. Lucian. He stepped out of the trees, his form tall and imposing, his presence both terrifying and strangely reassuring. "You came back," she said, her voice a mixture of relief and apprehension. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I told you I would. I thought I was being watched," she said, her voice trembling. He tilted his head slightly, a flicker of amusement in his eyes.
"You were," he said simply, "by me."
She felt a blush creep up her cheeks. She'd been so focused on the threat of the hunters, she hadn't considered that he might be watching her.
"Why?" she asked.
He shrugged, his shoulders moving with a fluid grace that was both animalistic and strangely elegant. To make sure you were safe, he said. And to see if you'd come.
Come?
She repeated, confused.
To the forest, he said. To start your journey.
She looked at him, her eyes searching his. She was still afraid, but the fear was mingled with a growing sense of curiosity, of excitement. She wanted to know more, to understand the world he inhabited, the world she was now a part of. I don't know if I'm ready, she said, her voice hesitant. He smiled then, a slow, captivating smile that transformed his face. You are stronger than you think, Celine, he said. And you're not alone. He reached out a hand, his fingers long and strong. She hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. But then, she took his hand. His touch was warm and surprisingly gentle, sending a jolt of awareness through her. It felt right. The touch was brief. He let her hand go quickly. He stepped back, his eyes locking with hers. Tonight, he said, his voice low and resonant. Meet me here, under the moon. It's time you learned the truth about who you are. And with those words, the decision, though still daunting, felt inevitable. A whisper, yes, but one she was finally ready to hear. Chapter 6. The Unveiling of Ancient Secrets. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Celine found herself unable to focus on anything, her mind consumed by the impending meeting with Lucien. She tried to busy herself with her usual chores, tending her garden, preparing her remedies, but her hands moved mechanically, her thoughts elsewhere. The familiar comfort of her routine was gone, replaced by a nervous anticipation that hummed beneath her skin. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, Celine felt a growing sense of unease. She paced restlessly, her eyes constantly drawn to the window, to the darkening forest beyond. She changed her clothes several times, finally settling on a simple pair of jeans and a comfortable sweater, clothes that would allow her to move freely. She also braided her hair, securing it tightly at the nape of her neck, a small act of control in a situation that felt increasingly out of her control. As the last rays of sunlight faded and the first stars began to appear, Celine stepped outside. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The moon, a sliver shy of full, cast a pale, ethereal glow over the landscape. She made her way to the clearing, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses on high alert. Lucien was already there, waiting for her. He stood near the moss-covered rock, his form silhouetted against the moonlit sky. He was wearing dark clothes that blended seamlessly with the shadows, making him seem almost like a creature of the night. You came, he said, his voice a low murmur in the stillness. She nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight with a mixture of fear and excitement. He gestured towards the rock.
Sit, he said.
She sat down, her body tense, her eyes fixed on him. He sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, smell the familiar scent of pine and wolf that clung to him. Tonight, he said, his voice low and serious, I'm going to tell you the story of our people. The story of the loup-garou. He began to speak, his voice a captivating blend of history and myth. He told her of a time long ago when humans and wolves lived in harmony, when the ability to shift between forms was a gift, a connection to the natural world. He spoke of the ancient pacts made with the moon, of the power that flowed through their veins, of the responsibility that came with that power. He told her of the rise of fear and hatred, of the persecution they had faced, of the centuries of hiding and running, of the constant threat of discovery and death. He spoke of the hunters, their relentless pursuit, their unwavering belief that the loup-garou were monsters to be eradicated. As he spoke, Celine felt a growing sense of connection to his words, to the history he was revealing. It was as if she were hearing a story she already knew, a story that was written in her blood, in her very DNA. She remembered her grandmother's tales, the stories she dismissed as folklore. Now she understood that they were more than just stories. They were fragments of a truth, a hidden history that had been passed down through generations. But why me? She asked, her voice interrupting his narrative.
Why now?
He turned to her, his golden eyes searching hers.
Because you're the last of your line, he said.
The last descendant of a powerful lineage. Your grandmother knew this. She tried to protect you, to keep you hidden. But the blood moon, it awakened your power. It made you visible. Celine felt a chill run down her spine. She was the last. The weight of that responsibility settled upon her, a heavy burden. But I don't know how to shift, she said, her voice faltering. He smiled gently. It's in your blood, he said.
It's a part of you.
It will come naturally when you're ready. But it takes practice, control.
And trust.
Trust? She repeated. He nodded. Trust in yourself. Trust in your instincts. And trust in me. He reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. His fingers were warm and strong, his grip firm but gentle. She looked into his eyes, and for a moment, she saw past the wildness, past the danger, to the vulnerability that lay beneath. She saw a man who had lived for centuries, who had seen countless horrors, who had carried the burden of his people's history on his shoulders. She felt a surge of empathy for him, a connection that transcended the fear and uncertainty she felt. She squeezed his hand, a silent acknowledgement of that connection. I will try, she said, and the words came easily, truthfully. He nodded, his grip tightening slightly on hers, as the moon shone down on the unlikely pair. A low howl pierced the night, not menacing, but mournful, distant. It seemed to come from far away, across the hills. Lucian stirred, his body tensing. Another pack, he explained softly, acknowledging the moon. Celine felt a shiver, not of fear, but of something else. A longing, a pull. And she knew, with a certainty that surprised even her, that she was ready to begin. Ready to learn, to embrace the heritage that was hers. The ancient secrets were unveiled, and a new, terrifying, and exhilarating chapter had begun. Chapter 7. Bonds forged in moonlight. The howl faded into the stillness of the night, leaving a lingering echo in its wake. Celine, her hand still clasped in Lucian's, felt a strange resonance with that distant call, a primal stirring within her that she couldn't quite explain. It was as if a part of her recognized that sound, understood its meaning, even though her conscious mind remained bewildered. Lucian released her hand, the warmth of his touch lingering on her skin. He stood up, his movements fluid and graceful, and offered her his hand again.
Come, he said.
It's time. She hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of anticipation, of excitement. She took his hand, and he pulled her to her feet. He led her deeper into the forest, away from the familiar paths, towards the heart of the ancient woods. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to shift and move with a life of their own. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the sounds of the night, the rustling of leaves, the hooting of an owl, the distant cry of a nightjar seemed to amplify, creating a symphony of wildness. As they walked, Lucian began to teach her. He spoke of the importance of listening to her instincts, of trusting her senses, of allowing her body to guide her. He showed her how to move silently through the undergrowth, how to blend with the shadows, how to become one with the forest. He explained the process of shifting, describing it not as a painful transformation, but as a release, a surrender to the wolf within. He told her that it was a matter of will, of intention, of allowing the ancient power that flowed through her veins to take over. It's like dreaming, he said, his voice low and soothing. You let go of your conscious mind, and you allow your subconscious to take control. You visualize the form you want to take. You feel the fur, the claws, the powerful muscles. You become the wolf. Celine listened intently, her mind absorbing his words, her body trying to mimic his movements. She stumbled several times, her human clumsiness a stark contrast to his effortless grace. But he was patient, encouraging, his golden eyes watching her with a mixture of understanding and something else. Something that made her heart beat faster. They reached a small clearing, bathed in the silvery light of the moon. A natural amphitheater, surrounded by towering trees. It felt like a sacred space, a place where the veil between the human world and the spirit world was thin. "This is where you'll try," Lucian said, his voice barely a whisper. "This is where you'll connect with your wolf." Celine felt a surge of fear, a wave of doubt that threatened to overwhelm her. She looked at Lucian, her eyes pleading. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. He smiled gently, reassuringly. "You can," he said. "I know you can. I'll be here. I won't let anything happen to you." His words, his presence, gave her the courage she needed. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes, trying to calm her racing heart. She focused on his instructions, on the image of the wolf, on the feeling of the fur, the claws, the powerful muscles. She visualized herself transforming, shedding her human skin, embracing the wildness within. She felt a strange, tingling sensation, a warmth that spread through her body, from the tips of her toes to the roots of her hair. Her heart beat faster, her breath came in ragged gasps. She felt a shift, a subtle change in her bones, in her muscles. A surge of power coursed through her veins, a feeling of exhilaration, of freedom. But then, the fear came back, a wave of panic that threatened to break her concentration. She opened her eyes, gasping for air, her body trembling. She was still human, still Celine. She looked at Lucian, her eyes filled with disappointment. It's not working," she said, her voice shaking. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to cup her cheek. His touch was warm and comforting, sending a jolt of electricity through her. "It takes time," he said softly. "It takes practice. Don't be discouraged." He looked into her eyes, his golden gaze holding hers captive. "Trust me," he said. "Let go. Let your instincts guide you. Don't fight it." His words, his presence, his touch were like an anchor, grounding her, calming her fears. She closed her eyes again, taking another deep breath, focusing on his voice, on his scent, on the feeling of his hand on her cheek. She surrendered to the feeling, to the power that flowed through her veins. She let go of her fear, of her doubt, of her self-consciousness. She allowed her instincts to take over, to guide her. She felt the shift again, stronger this time, more intense. Her bones ached, her muscles stretched, her skin tingled. She felt a surge of power, a wildness that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She heard a gasp, a sound that was both hers and not hers. She opened her eyes, and she saw the world through new eyes. The moonlight seemed brighter, the colors more vibrant, the sounds sharper. She looked down, and she saw paws, covered in thick, dark fur. She was standing on 4 legs, her body lower to the ground, her senses heightened. She had done it. She had shifted. She was a wolf. She lifted her head and howled. It was a sound of pure joy, of freedom, of release. A sound of connection that echoed with the howl of the distant pack and with the essence of the moon above. It was the sound of Celine embracing her true self. A bond, forged in moonlight, between woman and wolf, between 2 souls destined to meet. Chapter 8. Shadows of Doubt and Desire. The howl echoed through the silent forest, a primal cry of liberation that sent shivers down Celine's spine, even in her transformed state. She felt different, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally. Her senses were incredibly heightened. The scent of the earth, the trees, the faintest trace of other creatures, all flooded her awareness with an intensity she'd never experienced before. She could hear the whisper of the wind through the leaves, the scuttling of small animals in the undergrowth, the distant hooting of an owl. And she could see in the darkness, the moonlight illuminating the forest floor with a clarity that was breathtaking. She took a tentative step, her paws sinking slightly into the soft earth. It felt strange, unfamiliar, yet also instinctively right. She moved with a newfound grace, her body flowing effortlessly over the uneven terrain. She was a creature of the forest, a part of the wild, and it felt exhilarating. Lucian, who had remained in his human form, watched her with a mixture of pride and something else. A guardedness, perhaps? Or was it simply the reflection of the moon in his golden eyes? He had shifted his position, though, leaning against a nearby tree, his arms crossed, a posture that suggested both observation and a subtle distancing. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that resonated through the clearing. Celine turned her head, her wolf eyes meeting his. She couldn't speak, of course, but she tried to convey her feelings through her gaze, through her posture. She felt a surge of joy, of freedom, but also a hint of confusion. It was all so new, so overwhelming. She took a few more steps, testing her new form, her new senses. She ran in a small circle, feeling the wind rush through her fur, the power of her muscles as she moved. She felt a connection to the earth, to the forest, to the moon, that was unlike anything she'd ever experienced before. She stopped in front of Lucian, her tail wagging slightly, her eyes filled with a mixture of excitement and questioning. She wanted to know more, to understand this new reality, this new part of herself. He smiled, a slow, gentle smile that reached his eyes. "You're a natural," he said. "You took to it quickly." She whined softly, a sound of frustration. She wanted to talk to him, to ask him 1,000 questions, but she was trapped in this wolf form, unable to express herself with words. He seemed to understand her frustration.
"It takes practice," he said.
"You'll learn to control the shift, to communicate, even in this form. But it takes time." He reached out a hand, his fingers long and strong, and for a moment, she hesitated. She was a wolf, a wild creature. Should she allow him to touch her? But then, she remembered the connection she felt with him, the trust that had been forged between them. She lowered her head, allowing him to stroke her fur. His touch was gentle, reassuring, sending a wave of warmth through her. She leaned into his touch, enjoying the feeling of his hand on her fur, the connection it represented. But even as she enjoyed the physical sensation, a part of her remained wary, uncertain. She was still Celine, the woman who had lived a solitary life, who had built walls around her heart to protect it from pain. And Lucian, despite his kindness, despite the connection she felt with him, was still a mystery, a creature of a different world. He withdrew his hand, and she felt a pang of disappointment, a longing for that connection to continue. She looked up at him, her wolf eyes questioning. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable.
"We should head back," he said.
"It's getting late." He turned and began to walk back towards her cottage, his movements fluid and graceful. Celine hesitated for a moment, her instincts telling her to stay in the forest, to run free, to explore this new world. But she also knew that she needed him, that she needed his guidance, his knowledge. She followed him, her wolf form moving silently through the undergrowth, her senses on high alert. She felt a strange mixture of emotions, a whirlwind of fear, excitement, doubt, and desire. The desire was the most unsettling, the most unexpected. It was a primal urge, a pull towards Lucian that was both physical and emotional. It was the wolf within her, recognizing its mate, its protector, its leader. But it was also Celine, the woman, responding to the man, to his strength, his kindness, his vulnerability. It was a dangerous combination, a potent mix of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her carefully constructed defenses. She could feel him watching her, even though his back was to her. It was as if he knew every thought in her mind, every subtle shift of her emotions. The awareness pricked at her. As they neared her cottage, the first hint of doubt began to creep in. What was she doing? Was she truly ready for this? To embrace this wild, unpredictable life? To trust this man, this wolf, with her future? The shadows of doubt, fueled by years of solitude and self-preservation, began to dance with the undeniable, intoxicating desire that Lucian ignited within her. It was a conflict that would not be easily resolved, a battle between her past and her potential future. Chapter 9. The Price of a Forbidden Touch. The cottage, bathed in the soft glow of the moon, felt both familiar and alien. Celine, still in her wolf form, hesitated at the edge of the garden, her heightened senses picking up the subtle changes in the air, the cooling earth, The faintest scent of wood smoke from a neighboring chimney, the almost imperceptible rustle of her own herbs swaying in the night breeze. Everything was sharper, more intense, viewed through the prism of her wolf senses. Lucian, standing just inside the garden's perimeter, watched her. He hadn't spoken since they left the clearing, maintaining a careful distance, a silent acknowledgement of the complex emotions swirling between them. The easy camaraderie of the lesson felt distant, replaced by a palpable tension, a charged awareness that crackled in the air. Celine shifted her weight, her paws digging slightly into the soft earth. The transformation back to her human form was the next hurdle, a step that felt even more daunting than the initial shift. She didn't want to lose the feeling of freedom, the exhilarating connection to the wild that she'd experienced in the forest. But she also knew she couldn't remain a wolf forever. And, more pressingly, she needed to talk to Lucian, to voice the questions and doubts that swirled within her. He seemed to sense her hesitation. "It's all right," he said, his voice low and reassuring, breaking the silence. "Just reverse the process. Visualize your human form. Feel your skin, your bones, your muscles returning to their normal state. Let go of the wolf." His words were simple, but the task felt monumental. She closed her eyes, trying to follow his instructions, trying to conjure the image of her human self. But the wolf was strong, dominant, reluctant to relinquish its hold. She felt the resistance, a primal fear of losing this newfound power, this connection to the wild. She struggled, her body trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She felt a sharp pain, a tearing sensation, as if her very being was being ripped apart. She cried out, a sound that was both wolf and human, a mournful whimper that echoed through the night. Lucian was instantly beside her, his hand reaching out to touch her, to offer comfort. But he stopped, his hand hovering in the air, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and restraint. He knew, instinctively, that touching her now, while she was in this vulnerable state, between forms, would be dangerous. "Don't," he said, his voice strained. "Don't touch me." The words were directed at himself, at her. Celine opened her eyes, her vision blurred, her body racked with pain. She saw him, his face close to hers, his golden eyes filled with a conflict that mirrored her own. She saw the desire in his eyes, the longing but also the fear, the awareness of the forbidden nature of that desire. The Loup-garou were bound by ancient laws, by strict rules that governed their interactions with humans, and even amongst themselves. The bond between a shifter and their first transformed was sacred, powerful, and fraught with danger. It was a bond that could easily be twisted, corrupted, by uncontrolled emotions, by unchecked desires. Celine understood, instinctively, the risk. She felt the pull towards him, the primal urge to connect, to surrender to the wolf within. But she also knew that she couldn't, that she mustn't. She had to regain control, to complete the transformation, to return to her human form. She took a deep breath, focusing on his words, on his presence, on the anchor he represented. She visualized her human self, her skin, her bones, her muscles. She felt the wolf receding, fading, replaced by the familiar sensations of her human body. The pain subsided, the trembling eased. She felt her paws transforming into hands, her fur melting away, her body shifting back to its normal shape. She stumbled, her legs weak and unsteady, and Lucian caught her before she fell, his strong arms wrapping around her, supporting her. She was human again, naked and vulnerable, held close to his warm, powerful body. She felt the heat of his skin, the scent of pine and wolf that clung to him, the steady beat of his heart against her ear. It was a moment of intense intimacy, of forbidden connection, that sent a shiver of both fear and desire through her. For a heartbeat, they remained locked in that embrace, the silence between them thick with unspoken emotions. Then Lucian slowly, reluctantly, released her. He stepped back, creating a distance between them, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and relief. Celine wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of her nakedness, of her vulnerability. She felt a blush creep up her cheeks, a wave of shame and embarrassment. She wanted to run, to hide, to escape the intensity of the moment. He was looking at the cottage. Anywhere but at her. "You should go inside," he said, his voice hoarse.
"Get dressed.
"We'll talk in the morning." He turned and vanished into the shadows of the forest, leaving her alone, shivering in the moonlight, her body still trembling from the transformation, her mind reeling from the forbidden touch, the unspoken desire that hung heavy in the air. The price of this new life, she realized, was not just the danger of the hunters, but the internal battle, the constant struggle to control the wolf within, to resist the pull of a connection that could destroy them both. It was a price she wasn't sure she was willing to pay. Chapter 10. Scars of the past, hopes for the future. The chill of the night air, combined with the lingering vulnerability of her transformation, sent shivers through Celine's naked form. She hurried inside the cottage, the familiar sanctuary a stark contrast to the wildness of the forest and the intense encounter with Lucian. She quickly dressed in a soft, worn nightgown, the familiar fabric a small comfort against the turmoil within her. She lit a fire in the hearth, the crackling flames casting dancing shadows on the walls, chasing away the lingering chill. She wrapped herself in a thick woolen blanket and sat in her armchair, staring into the fire, her mind replaying the events of the night. The shift, the exhilaration of running as a wolf, the forbidden touch, the unspoken desire, it was all too much, too fast. She felt overwhelmed, lost, unsure of what to do, of who she was. The carefully constructed walls she'd built around her heart, around her life, had been breached, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. She thought of Lucian, of his strength, his kindness, his vulnerability. She felt a connection to him, a bond that defied logic and reason. But it was a dangerous connection, a forbidden desire, that threatened to destroy everything she'd worked so hard to build. She remembered her past, the reason she'd come to Havenwood 20 years ago, seeking refuge, seeking anonymity. She'd been running from a different kind of wolf, a man who had used his power, his charisma, to manipulate and control her. A man who had broken her heart, her spirit, leaving her scarred and afraid. The scars were not just emotional. She traced a thin, silvery line on her wrist, a physical reminder of that painful past. A past she'd tried to bury, to forget. But the events of the night had brought it all back, the fear, the vulnerability, the sense of being trapped. She realized, with a sinking heart, that she'd been drawn to Lucian for the same reasons she'd been drawn to him. The power, the charisma, the sense of danger, it was a pattern she'd repeated, a cycle of attraction and destruction that she seemed doomed to repeat. But Lucian was different, she told herself. He was kind, he was protective, he had shown her nothing but respect. He had warned her of the dangers, he had held back, even when she knew he desired her. He was not him. But the doubt lingered, a nagging voice in the back of her mind that whispered of betrayal, of heartbreak, of pain. She was afraid, terrified of making the same mistake again, of opening herself up to that kind of vulnerability. She looked at the single wolf hair she'd found that morning, still lying on the small table beside her chair. She picked it up, holding it between her fingers, its texture both coarse and strangely soft. It was a tangible link to Lucian, to the wolf, to the new life that was unfolding before her. A new life. The thought filled her with both fear and excitement. She'd spent so many years hiding, running from her past, denying her true self. Now, she had a chance to embrace that self, to live authentically, to be a part of something bigger than herself. She thought of the Loup-Garou, of their history, their struggles, their resilience. She felt a growing sense of belonging, a connection to a people she'd never known, a heritage she'd long denied. She wanted to be a part of that, to learn, to grow, to contribute. But she also knew that it wouldn't be easy. There were dangers, both external and internal. The hunters, the forbidden desires, the constant struggle to control the wolf within it was a daunting prospect. She looked into the fire, the flames reflecting in her eyes. She saw a woman who had been broken, who had been scarred, but who was also strong, resilient, determined to survive. She saw a woman who was finally ready to face her past, to embrace her future, to choose her own path. She made a decision. She would not run away again. She would stay, she would learn, she would fight. She would embrace her heritage, her power, her connection to Lucian, but she would do it on her own terms. She would not be controlled, manipulated, or broken again. She stood up, feeling a surge of determination, of hope. She would talk to Lucian in the morning. She would tell him her fears, her doubts, her hopes. She would lay down the boundaries, set the terms of their relationship. She would not be a victim. She would be a survivor. She would be Celine Dorn, a woman of the forest, a daughter of the moon, a loup-garou. And she would be free. As the first light of dawn broke, painting the sky pink, Celine sat by the window.
She was calmer now,
resolved. She was ready to speak her mind, and lay bare her heart's condition. The future was uncertain, yes, but she felt, for the first time in a very long time, a sense of purpose, a sense of hope, and a glimmer of a future where the scars of the past could finally heal, replaced by the promise of a love forged in moonlight, but tempered by the strength of her own will. Chapter 11. A haven in the heart of the storm. The morning light, filtering through the lace curtains of Celine's cottage, brought with it a sense of fragile peace. The turmoil of the previous night felt distant, almost dreamlike, yet the memory of Lucian's touch, the raw vulnerability of her transformation, lingered like a phantom limb. She'd slept fitfully, her dreams a jumble of wolf howls, golden eyes, and the silvery scar on her wrist. She rose and dressed, choosing clothes that reflected her newfound resolve: sturdy boots, practical trousers, and a soft, but warm, woolen sweater. She brewed a pot of strong coffee, the familiar aroma grounding her, anchoring her to the present. As she sipped her coffee, she looked out the window towards the forest. She half expected to see Lucian waiting for her, but the garden was empty, bathed in the soft morning light. She felt a pang of disappointment, quickly followed by a surge of relief. She needed time to gather her thoughts, to prepare for the conversation she knew they needed to have. She decided to work in her garden, the familiar rhythm of tending her herbs and flowers a balm to her frayed nerves. She weeded, pruned, and watered, her hands moving automatically, her mind focused on the task at hand. The physical labor was a welcome distraction, a way to channel her nervous energy. As she worked, she thought about Lucian, about the connection she felt with him, the forbidden desire that simmered beneath the surface. She knew she couldn't deny her feelings, but she also knew she couldn't let them control her. She needed to establish boundaries, to protect herself, to ensure that she wouldn't repeat the mistakes of her past. She heard a sound, a soft footfall on the path behind her. She turned, her heart pounding in her chest, and saw Lucian standing at the edge of the garden. He was wearing dark clothes, as usual, but his expression was softer, more approachable than it had been the previous night. "Good morning," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Morning," she replied, her voice steadier than she expected. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped into the garden, his eyes scanning her face, searching for some clue to her mood. "I wanted to apologize," he said, his voice sincere. "For last night. For pushing you. For not being more careful." She nodded, accepting his apology.
"It's all right," she said.
"It was a lot. For both of us. I know the transformation is hard. Especially the first one," he continued, approaching slowly. "It is," she confirmed, looking at her hands, still feeling the phantom claws. An awkward silence fell between them, filled only by the chirping of birds and the gentle rustle of leaves. Celine knew she needed to break the silence, to initiate the conversation she'd been preparing for all morning. She took a deep breath. "Lucian," she said, her voice firm. "We need to talk." He nodded, his golden eyes meeting hers. "I know," he said. She gestured towards a small wooden bench nestled beneath a blossoming apple tree.
"Let's sit," she said.
They sat down, a careful distance between them, the tension palpable. Celine took another deep breath, gathering her courage. I have a past," she began, her voice trembling slightly. A past that I've tried to run away from. A past that involves someone like you. Someone who used their power, their charisma, to control me. She told him about her previous relationship, about the manipulation, the heartbreak, the scars that remained. She told him about her fear, her vulnerability, her determination not to repeat the same mistakes. Lucian listened patiently, his expression unreadable, his golden eyes fixed on her face. He didn't interrupt, he didn't judge, he simply listened. When she was finished, he spoke, his voice low and gentle. "I understand," he said. "And I'm sorry for what you went through. I'm not telling you this to push you away," she said. "But I need you to understand. I need boundaries. I need trust." "I know," he said. "And I respect that. I want to earn your trust, Celine. I want to show you that I'm not him." He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle, tentative. She didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze his hand either. It was a gesture of acceptance, but also of caution. "I can teach you about the loup-garou," he continued, "about your powers, about our history. But I also want to protect you. And I want a haven," she added, looking directly into his eyes. "Not a cage. Not a repeat of the past. A place where I can be me, both the human and the wolf." "Then that is what I will work to help you to create," Lucian affirmed. He smiled then, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. It was a smile that spoke of hope, of understanding, of a shared journey. It was a smile that, for the first time, eased the knot of fear in Celine's heart, replacing it with a fragile, but growing, sense of trust. A haven in the heart of the storm, that's what they would build, together. A place of safety, of acceptance, of love, where the scars of the past could finally heal and the hopes for the future could blossom. Chapter 12. The Gathering Darkness. The tentative peace established between Celine and Lucian was a fragile thing, a delicate seedling pushing through hardened earth. They spent the following days in a cautious dance, exploring the boundaries of their newfound understanding. Celine continued her daily routines, tending her garden, brewing her remedies, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of her life. But now there was a difference. A heightened awareness, a sense of anticipation that hummed beneath the surface. Lucian visited her regularly, sometimes in the daylight, sometimes under the cloak of darkness. He taught her more about the loup-garou, about their history, their culture, their laws. He showed her how to control her shift, how to harness her heightened senses, how to blend with the forest, how to become one with the wolf within. Their training sessions were intense, both physically and emotionally. Celine pushed herself, determined to master her new abilities, to prove to herself and to Lucian that she was strong, that she was capable. She stumbled, she fell, she made mistakes, but she never gave up. Lucian was a patient teacher, his guidance firm but gentle. He challenged her, pushed her, but he also respected her limits, her fears. He never pressured her, never forced her to do anything she wasn't ready for. But even as Celine grew stronger, more confident in her abilities, a sense of unease began to creep in. The forest, which had once been her sanctuary, now felt different. The whispers in the wind seemed more ominous. The shadows seemed to linger longer. The sounds of the night seemed to carry a hidden threat. She noticed small, subtle signs: a broken twig, a disturbed patch of earth, a faint, unfamiliar scent that lingered in the air. Signs that someone or something was watching her, tracking her. She told Lucian about her concerns, her voice filled with a growing apprehension. He listened intently, his golden eyes narrowing, his expression turning grim. "The hunters," he said, his voice low and serious. "They know you're here. They know you've awakened. They're getting closer." The words sent a chill down Celine's spine. She'd known this was a possibility, but hearing it confirmed, hearing the threat made real, filled her with a renewed sense of fear. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We prepare," he said. "We train. We get ready to fight." He intensified their training, focusing on combat, on defense, on survival. He taught her how to use her claws, her teeth, her heightened senses to her advantage. He showed her how to move silently, how to strike quickly, how to defend herself against attack. The training was brutal, exhausting, but Celine pushed through, driven by a fierce determination to protect herself, to protect Lucien, to protect the life she was beginning to build. But it wasn't just the hunters that worried her. There was something else, something more subtle, more insidious. A growing darkness that seemed to be gathering around them, a sense of impending doom that she couldn't quite shake. She noticed changes in Lucien, too. He became more withdrawn, more guarded, his golden eyes often clouded with a worry he tried to hide. He spent more time in the forest, patrolling the perimeter, searching for signs of the hunters. One evening, as they were finishing their training, Celine noticed a deep gash on Lucien's arm, a wound he'd tried to conceal beneath his sleeve. "What happened?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. He hesitated, then sighed.
"A skirmish," he said.
"With one of the hunters." "It's nothing." But Celine knew it wasn't nothing. It was a sign that the threat was real, that the danger was escalating. She felt a surge of anger, of protectiveness, towards Lucien. She didn't want him to get hurt. She didn't want him to risk his life for her. "You should have told me," she said, her voice trembling. He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of regret and something else. Something that looked like admiration.
"I didn't want to worry you," he said.
"I'm not a child, Lucien," she said. "I need to know. We're in this together." He nodded, acknowledging her words.
"You're right," he said. "I'm sorry."
He touched her then, for just a moment, on her hand. A light, brief touch. He pulled back quickly. The darkness was gathering, the threat was growing, but so was their connection, their bond, their shared determination to face whatever came their way. The haven they were building was under siege, but they would not surrender. They would fight, together, for their lives, for their love, for their future. The storm was coming, but they were ready, or at least, as ready as they could be, to face the gathering darkness, hand in paw, heart to heart. Chapter 13. Trials of Trust and Loyalty. The skirmish with the hunter, though seemingly minor, served as a stark reminder of the ever-present danger that loomed over Celine and Lucien. Their training intensified, becoming less about honing Celine's newfound abilities and more about preparing for a direct confrontation. The easy camaraderie that had marked their earlier sessions was replaced by a grim determination, a shared understanding that their fragile peace was about to be shattered. Lucien pushed Celine harder than ever, drilling her in combat techniques, forcing her to confront her fears and push past her limits. He taught her how to anticipate an opponent's moves, how to use her environment to her advantage, how to fight not just with brute force, but with cunning and strategy. Celine, in turn, surprised both Lucien and herself with her resilience and adaptability. The fear was still there, a constant undercurrent, but it was now tempered by a growing sense of confidence, a fierce determination to protect herself and the one she was beginning to care for deeply. She learned quickly, absorbing Lucien's teachings like a sponge, her body adapting to the demands of her wolf form with increasing ease. But the training wasn't just physical. Lucien also began to prepare Celine for the psychological warfare that the hunters employed. He warned her about their tactics, their methods of manipulation, their ability to exploit weaknesses and sow discord. "They'll try to get inside your head," he said, his voice grim. "They'll try to turn you against me, against your own kind. You have to be strong. You have to trust your instincts. You have to trust me." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning.
Trust.
It was the foundation of their relationship, the fragile bond that held them together. But it was also the most vulnerable point, the easiest target for the hunters to attack. And the attacks came, subtly at first. Whispers in the wind, carrying snippets of conversations, designed to plant seeds of doubt in Celine's mind. Strange occurrences in the forest, symbols carved into trees, objects left in her path meant to unsettle her, to make her question Lucien's motives. One evening, as Celine was returning to her cottage after a particularly grueling training session, she found a small, intricately carved wooden wolf lying on her doorstep. It was a beautiful object, crafted with exquisite detail, but it radiated a sense of menace, of dark intent. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the smooth contours of the wolf's form. She felt a strange pull towards it, a fascination that warred with her growing sense of unease. She knew, instinctively, that it was a trap, a test, designed to exploit her connection to the wolf, to Lucian. She brought the wolf inside, placing it on her mantelpiece, where she could keep an eye on it. She didn't tell Lucian about it, at first, her mind struggling to make sense of its meaning, of its purpose. She wanted to trust him, to believe in his innocence, but the whispers, the doubts, were beginning to take root. She found herself watching him more closely, scrutinizing his every move, his every word. She looked for signs of deception, of betrayal, her heart aching with the possibility that he might not be who she thought he was. Lucian, in turn, sensed her growing distance, her suspicion. He didn't confront her directly, but he became more withdrawn, more guarded, his golden eyes often clouded with a sadness he tried to hide. The fragile trust between them began to fray, strained by the unseen forces that sought to tear them apart. One night, as they were walking through the forest, Celine finally confronted him. "What is it, Lucian?" she asked, her voice trembling.
"What aren't you telling me?"
He stopped, his gaze meeting hers, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" he asked. She held out the wooden figurine. "Where did this come from?" He sighed, his shoulders slumping.
"I don't know," he said.
"But I know what it is. It's a test, Celine. A test of your loyalty, of your trust. And who sent it?" She pressed, her voice rising. "The hunters?"
"Perhaps," he said.
"Or someone else?" "Someone else?" she repeated, confused. "Who?" He hesitated, then looked away, his gaze fixed on the dark trees that surrounded them. "There are factions," he said. "Within our own kind. Not everyone agrees with my methods. Not everyone believes in peace with humans." His words were a revelation, a confirmation of her worst fears. The threat wasn't just external, it was internal, a betrayal from within his own people. And she was caught in the middle, a pawn in a game she didn't understand. The trials of trust and loyalty were not just about the hunters, but about navigating the treacherous landscape of the Loup-Garou world, a world where even the closest bonds could be shattered by suspicion and betrayal. Chapter 14. Echoes of Betrayal and Redemption. Lucian's revelation hung in the air like a shroud, casting a long shadow over their already precarious relationship. Celine felt a cold knot of dread tighten in her stomach. The enemy wasn't just the hunters, the faceless figures lurking in the shadows, it was also within the ranks of the Loup-Garou, a betrayal that cut far deeper than any physical wound. "Who are these factions?" Celine asked, her voice barely a whisper, struggling to keep the tremor from her tone.
"And why would they target me?"
Lucian sighed, running a hand through his dark hair, his weariness evident. "There are those who believe the old ways are the only ways," he explained. "They see humans as a threat, as prey, and they resent any attempt at coexistence. You, Celine, represent everything they oppose, a human embracing her Loup-Garou heritage, a bridge between two worlds. And you?" She pressed, her eyes searching his. "Where do you stand?" His golden eyes met hers, unwavering, filled with a sincerity that she desperately wanted to believe. "I believe in a different future," he said. "A future where we can live in peace, where we don't have to hide, to run, to fight. But it's a dangerous path, a path that many oppose." "So, this wooden wolf, it's a message?" she asked, gesturing towards the carving she still held in her hand. "It's a warning," Lucian confirmed. "And a challenge. They're testing your loyalty, trying to see if you'll turn to them, embrace their ideology. And if I don't..." He looked away, his jaw clenched, his voice tight with emotion. "Then you become a threat. An enemy." The words sent a shiver down Celine's spine. She was caught in a web of intrigue, a battle for power and ideology that she barely understood. She was a pawn, a symbol, a target. And her choices, her actions, could have devastating consequences, not just for herself, but for Lucian, for the future of the Loup-Garou. She felt a surge of anger, of resentment, towards those who would manipulate her, who would use her as a weapon in their own twisted game. But she also felt a renewed determination, a fierce resolve to fight for what she believed in, for the fragile peace she was beginning to build with Lucian. "I won't betray you," she said, her voice firm, her eyes meeting his. "I won't let them win." He smiled then, a faint, weary smile that didn't quite reach his eyes.
"I know," he said,
"but it won't be easy. They'll keep testing you, pushing you, trying to break you." "I'm stronger than they think," she said, her voice filled with a conviction she didn't entirely feel. He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle, reassuring. His fingers intertwined with hers, a silent pledge of support, of solidarity. It was a moment of connection, of shared vulnerability, that eased the knot of fear in her heart. "We'll face them together," he said. "We'll fight for our future, for our right to choose our own path." But even as they stood there, hand in hand, under the pale moonlight, Celine knew that the battle had just begun. The echoes of betrayal, the whispers of doubt, would continue to haunt them, testing their trust, their loyalty, their love. The following days were filled with a tense anticipation, a sense of impending doom that hung over them like a storm cloud. Celine continued her training, pushing herself to her limits, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. But she also found herself withdrawing, isolating herself, her mind consumed by the internal conflict that raged within her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that she was being manipulated, that she was a pawn in a game she didn't understand. She questioned everything, everyone, even Lucian. One evening, as she was walking back to her cottage, she saw a figure standing at the edge of the forest. It was a woman, tall and slender, with long, dark hair and eyes that glowed with an unnatural, silver light. The woman smiled, a cold, cruel smile that sent a shiver down Celine's spine. "Celine Dorn," she said, her voice smooth and silky, like a viper's hiss. "We've been waiting for you." Celine knew, instinctively, who she was. One of the faction leaders, one of those who opposed Lucian, who sought to destroy the fragile peace they were trying to build. It was a moment of reckoning, a confrontation that would test her loyalty, her courage, her very soul. Redemption was possible, but only if she could withstand the siren call of betrayal, the lure of power that this woman represented. The past echoed in this present threat, and Celine's future hung precariously in the balance. Chapter 15. The Unraveling of Fate. The woman's silver eyes, cold and piercing, held Celine captive. They seemed to see straight through her, stripping away her defenses, exposing her vulnerabilities. There was a power in that gaze, a seductive allure that both terrified and strangely fascinated her. "Who are you?" Celine managed to ask, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound strong. The woman smiled again, a slow, deliberate curve of her lips that revealed sharp, almost predatory teeth. "My name is Lyra," she said, her voice a silken whisper that seemed to slither into Celine's mind. "And I'm here to offer you a choice." Celine stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses on high alert. She knew this was a trap, a test, but she couldn't resist the urge to hear what Lyra had to say. "A choice?" Celine repeated, her voice laced with suspicion. "Yes," Lyra purred, stepping closer, her movements fluid and graceful, like a predator stalking its prey. "A choice between two paths. Between two futures." She gestured towards the forest, towards the darkness that lurked beneath the trees. "You can continue to follow Lucian," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "A weak, misguided fool who clings to a naive dream of peace with humans. A dream that will lead to your destruction. Or," she continued, her silver eyes flashing with a dangerous light, "you can join us. Embrace your true heritage, your power, your destiny. Become a leader, a warrior, a force to be reckoned with." Her words were like poison, seeping into Celine's mind, planting seeds of doubt, of temptation. She thought of the struggles she'd faced, the fear, the uncertainty, the constant threat of the hunters. She thought of Lucian, of his vulnerability, his isolation, his seemingly impossible dream. Lyra's offer was seductive, a promise of power, of belonging, of a life free from fear and hiding. It was a temptation that resonated with the wolf within her, with the primal urge to dominate, to conquer, to survive. But it was also a betrayal, a rejection of everything she'd come to believe in, of the fragile trust she'd built with Lucian, of the love that was beginning to blossom between them. I don't understand, Celine stammered, her mind reeling. Why me? Lyra smiled, a knowing, almost pitying smile. Because you're special, Celine, she said. You're the last of your line, a descendant of a powerful lineage. You have the potential to be extraordinary. But Lucian is holding you back, keeping you chained to his weakness. She reached out and touched Celine's cheek, her fingers cold and smooth, like ice. Celine flinched, but she didn't pull away. She felt a strange connection to Lyra, a pull that was both terrifying and strangely alluring. Join us, Celine, Lyra whispered, her voice a hypnotic murmur. And together, we will reshape the world. We will restore the Loup-Garou to their rightful place. As rulers, as predators, as gods. The temptation was almost overwhelming, a siren song that promised power, glory, and an end to her struggles. But then, she remembered Lucian's face, his golden eyes filled with kindness, with vulnerability, with love. She remembered his words, his unwavering belief in a different future, a future where they could live in peace. She pulled away from Lyra's touch, her mind clearing, her resolve strengthening. No, she said, her voice firm, her eyes meeting Lyra's with newfound defiance. I won't betray him. I won't betray what I believe in. Lyra's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold fury. Then you have chosen your fate, she hissed. And it will be a painful one. She turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest, leaving Celine alone, trembling, but resolute. She knew she'd made the right choice, but she also knew that the consequences would be dire. The unraveling of fate had begun, and she was caught in the center of a storm that threatened to consume everything she held dear. Celine knew that she needed to tell Lucian immediately. She ran towards the usual place where they met. The night was darker than usual, and she could feel eyes watching her. Many eyes. But whose side were they on? She could not tell. And the uncertainty was almost as terrifying as the certainty of danger. The choice was made, the path was set, and the consequences, whatever they may be, were now inevitable. Chapter 16. A Choice Between Worlds. Celine ran through the moonlit forest, her heart pounding, her breath ragged. The image of Lyra's silver eyes burned into her mind. The familiar paths, once a source of comfort, now felt menacing, the shadows seeming to reach out and grab at her. She had to reach Lucian, to warn him, to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. She found him near the clearing where they often trained, his form silhouetted against the moonlit sky. He was standing still, his senses on high alert, as if he already knew something was wrong. Lucian, she called out, her voice breathless. He turned, his golden eyes searching hers, his expression grim. What is it? He asked. What happened? She rushed towards him, her words tumbling out in a rush. She told him about Lyra, about her offer, about her threat. She told him everything, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. Lucian listened intently, his face growing darker with each word. He didn't interrupt, he didn't judge, he simply absorbed the information, his mind already calculating the implications. When she was finished, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. I knew this was coming, he said, his voice heavy with resignation. I hoped it wouldn't. What do we do? She asked, her voice pleading. He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. We have a choice to make, Celine, he said. A choice between two worlds. He explained that Lyra's faction was growing stronger, gaining support among the Loup-Garou. They were preparing for war, a war against the humans, a war against those who opposed their vision of a world ruled by werewolves. We can join them, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. We can embrace their ideology, their methods. We can become a part of their army, fight for their cause. Celine felt a surge of revulsion. The thought of joining Lyra, of embracing her violence, her hatred, was abhorrent to her. Or, Lucian continued, his voice gaining strength, we can fight for what we believe in. We can stand against them, defend the fragile peace we've been trying to build. We can try to create a different future, a future where humans and loups-garous can coexist. The choice was clear, at least for Celine. She couldn't betray her values, her beliefs, her love for Lucian. She couldn't join the forces of darkness, no matter how tempting the offer of power might be. "I'll fight with you," she said, her voice firm, her eyes meeting his.
"I'll stand by your side."
He smiled then, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, a smile that eased the knot of fear in her heart.
"I know," he said.
"I never doubted you." He reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through her. His fingers intertwined with hers, a silent pledge of unity, of love, of shared determination. "But it won't be easy," he warned. "They'll come for us. They'll try to destroy everything we've built. We have to be ready." "We will be," she said, her voice filled with a newfound confidence. They spent the rest of the night preparing, gathering their resources, planning their strategy. They knew they were outnumbered, outmatched, but they also knew they had something the other side didn't have, a belief in a better future, a love that transcended the boundaries of species, a hope that refused to be extinguished. As dawn approached, they stood together at the edge of the forest, watching the sky lighten, their hearts filled with a mixture of trepidation and resolve. They knew the storm was coming, but they were ready to face it together. "There's something else," Lucian said, breaking the silence. "Something I haven't told you." Celine looked at him, her eyes questioning. "Lyra, she's my sister," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The words hit Celine like a physical blow. Lyra, the cold, cruel woman who had threatened her, who represented everything she opposed, was Lucian's sister? The revelation added another layer of complexity to the already tangled web of conflict, a personal betrayal that cut far deeper than any ideological difference. The choice between worlds was not just about abstract concepts of peace and war. It was about family, about loyalty, about love. It was about choosing between a brother and a sister, between a past filled with darkness and a future filled with hope. And Celine, caught in the middle, had to make a decision that would determine not just her own fate, but the fate of everyone she held dear. It was a choice that would test her strength, her courage, her very soul. The sun began to rise, painting the sky with beautiful colors. But Celine felt no beauty, only dread. Chapter 17. The Weight of 1,000 Moons. The revelation of Lyra's relationship to Lucian hung between them, a heavy, suffocating presence. Celine stared at him, her mind struggling to reconcile the image of the cold, menacing woman with the gentle, protective man she had come to love. Brother and sister. It seemed impossible, yet the truth was undeniable, etched in the lines of pain on Lucian's face. "Your sister?" Celine finally managed to say, her voice a hoarse whisper. Lucian nodded, his gaze averted, his shoulders slumped with a weariness that seemed to go beyond physical exhaustion. "Yes," he confirmed. "We were close once, before the darkness took her." He began to tell her their story, a story of a childhood bond shattered by tragedy, by conflicting ideologies, by the seductive allure of power. He spoke of their parents, strong, respected leaders of the loups-garous, who had instilled in them a belief in the old ways, in the superiority of their kind. But Lucian had always been different, he explained. He'd always questioned the traditions, the prejudices, the violence. He'd seen the beauty and the value in the human world, and he dreamed of a future where the two species could coexist. Lyra, on the other hand, had embraced their parents' teachings wholeheartedly. She'd reveled in her power, in her ability to dominate, to control. She'd seen humans as weak, as inferior, as prey. The turning point, Lucian explained, had been the death of their parents, killed by hunters. The tragedy had hardened Lyra's heart, fueling her hatred, her desire for revenge. She'd become obsessed with power, with restoring the Loup-Garou to what she believed was their rightful place as rulers of the world. Lucien, devastated by his parents' death, had sought a different path. He'd rejected Lyra's violence, her hatred, and he'd dedicated his life to finding a way to peace, to understanding, to coexistence. The siblings had become estranged, their paths diverging, their bond shattered by grief and conflicting ideologies. They'd become enemies, leaders of opposing factions, locked in a battle for the future of the Loup-Garou. As Lucien spoke, Celine felt a surge of empathy for him, a deep understanding of the pain he carried, the burden of his past. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between his love for his sister and his commitment to his beliefs. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice filled with compassion. He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and resignation.
"It's not your fault," he said.
"It's fate. The weight of 1,000 moons, pulling us in opposite directions." He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle, reassuring. His fingers intertwined with hers, a silent acknowledgement of their shared burden, their shared determination to fight for a different future. "But we don't have to be bound by fate," he said, his voice gaining strength. "We can choose our own path. We can create our own destiny." Celine squeezed his hand, her heart filled with a renewed sense of hope, of resolve. She understood now the depth of his commitment, the personal sacrifice he was willing to make, to fight for his beliefs, to fight for her. "We'll face her together," she said, her voice firm. "We'll fight for the future we believe in." But even as she spoke the words, Celine knew that the confrontation with Lyra would be more than just a battle of ideologies. It would be a battle of hearts, a test of familial bonds, a reckoning with a past that refused to stay buried. It would be a battle that could destroy them all, or, perhaps, offer a glimmer of redemption, a chance to heal the wounds of the past and forge a new future, together. The weight of 1,000 moons was heavy, but it was not insurmountable. They would carry it together, their love, their loyalty, their shared belief in a better future, their only weapons against the darkness that threatened to consume them. They prepared, in silence and with grim determination, for what was to come. They knew it would not be easy. It might cost them everything, but they were ready, or at least they hoped they were. Chapter 18. Where Shadows and Light Converge. The air crackled with anticipation, a palpable tension that hung heavy over the forest. Celine and Lucien had spent the day preparing, honing their skills, gathering their resources, mentally steeling themselves for the inevitable confrontation with Lyra and her followers. They knew it was only a matter of time before they came, and as dusk began to settle, painting the sky with hues of blood orange and deep violet, the waiting game ended. A chorus of howls, sharp and menacing, echoed through the trees, signaling the arrival of Lyra's pack. The sound sent a shiver down Celine's spine, a primal fear that resonated with the wolf within her. But she stood firm, her hand clasped tightly in Lucien's, drawing strength from his presence, from his unwavering resolve. They had chosen their battleground carefully, the clearing where Celine had first shifted, a place of power, a place where the veil between the human world and the spirit world was thin. It was a place that held both personal significance and strategic advantage. As the howls grew closer, figures began to emerge from the shadows, their forms shifting and fluid, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Lyra led the pack, her silver eyes fixed on Celine and Lucien, her expression a mask of cold fury. "So," Lyra said, her voice a silken whisper that carried across the clearing, "you have chosen your side, little brother. A pity. I had hoped you might see reason." Lucien stepped forward, his body tense, his golden eyes blazing with defiance. "There is no reason in your madness, Lyra," he said, his voice firm. "Only destruction." Lyra laughed, a cold, cruel sound that echoed through the trees. "Destruction is necessary," she said, "to cleanse the world, to restore the Loup-Garou to their rightful place." "And what of the humans?" Celine asked, her voice trembling slightly. but holding its ground. Do they deserve to be destroyed? Lyra turned her gaze to Celine, her silver eyes piercing, her expression filled with disdain.
They are weak, she said. Inferior.
They are prey. And we are the predators. That's not true, Celine retorted, her voice gaining strength. We can coexist. We can live in peace. Lyra scoffed.
Peace? She said.
Peace is an illusion. A weakness. There can only be one dominant species. And it will be us. She raised her hand, a signal to her pack. Take them, she commanded. The wolves surged forward, a wave of fur and teeth and claws, their howls filling the air. Celine and Lucien stood their ground, their hands still clasped, their bodies poised for battle. The clearing erupted in a frenzy of violence, a chaotic dance of shadows and light, of snarls and growls, and the clash of teeth on teeth. Celine shifted, embracing her wolf form, her senses heightened, her movements fluid and graceful. She fought with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed, driven by a fierce determination to protect Lucien, to protect the future they believed in. Lucien fought beside her, his human form a blur of motion, his strength and skill unmatched. He moved with a deadly grace, his every strike precise and powerful, his golden eyes blazing with a righteous fury. They fought back to back, a seamless unit, their movements synchronized, their instincts intertwined. They were two halves of a whole, their love, their loyalty, their shared belief in a better future, their greatest weapon. But the odds were stacked against them. Lyra's pack was larger, stronger, driven by a bloodlust that fueled their every move. Celine and Lucien were outnumbered, outmatched, their bodies battered and bruised, their strength waning. Celine saw her chance. She could attack Lyra, who stayed slightly to the rear, protected by her followers. But as she moved, one wolf blocked her. He was huge, powerful. Celine found herself fighting for her very life. As the battle raged, Celine saw an opening. Lyra was momentarily separated from her pack, her attention focused on Lucien. It was a risky move, a desperate gamble, but Celine knew she had to take it. She lunged towards Lyra, her claws extended, her teeth bared, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. It was the convergence of shadows and light, of brother and sister, of past and future, a moment that would decide the fate of them all. Chapter 19. The Heart's Reckoning. Celine's leap towards Lyra was a blur of motion, a desperate gamble fueled by adrenaline, and a fierce protectiveness towards Lucien. But Lyra, despite her momentary distraction, was not an easy target. She reacted with lightning speed, sidestepping Celine's attack and unleashing a counter-offensive of her own. The two women, human and wolf intertwined, clashed in the center of the clearing, a whirlwind of fur and claws and teeth. Celine fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal, her every move driven by instinct and a desperate need to survive. But Lyra was stronger, more experienced, her attacks precise and brutal. Celine felt a sharp pain as Lyra's claws raked across her side, drawing blood. She stumbled, her legs weakening, her vision blurring. But she refused to give up. She refused to yield. She had to protect Lucien. She had to stop Lyra. She had to fight for the future she believed in. She lunged again, her teeth sinking into Lyra's shoulder, drawing a yelp of pain. But Lyra retaliated, her powerful jaws clamping down on Celine's leg, sending a searing agony through her body. Celine cried out, a sound that was both wolf and human, a mournful wail that echoed through the clearing. She fell to the ground, her body racked with pain, her vision darkening. She saw Lucien fighting his way towards her, his face a mask of fury and desperation, but he was surrounded by Lyra's wolves, unable to reach her. Lyra stood over Celine, her silver eyes blazing with triumph, her fangs bared in a cruel smile. You should have joined me, Celine, she hissed. You could have been powerful. You could have ruled by my side. Celine looked up at her, her eyes filled with defiance, despite the pain, despite the fear. I would rather die, she gasped, than become like you. Lyra laughed, a cold, heartless sound.
Then die you shall, she said.
She raised her paw, her claws extended, ready to deliver the final blow. But then, a voice rang out, a voice filled with anguish and regret. Lyra!
Stop.
It was Lucian. He had broken free from the surrounding wolves, his body battered and bruised, but his eyes blazing with a fierce determination. He stood between Lyra and Celine, his arms outstretched, a shield against his sister's wrath. Lyra hesitated, her paw frozen in midair, her silver eyes widening in surprise. Lucian? She said, her voice faltering. What are you doing? I'm stopping you, he said, his voice firm. I won't let you kill her. I won't let you destroy everything we've fought for. Lyra's expression shifted, from surprise to anger, to something else. Something that looked like hurt. She chose her side, little brother, she said, her voice trembling. She chose to betray us. She chose love, Lucian retorted. She chose compassion. She chose a future where we can live in peace. Something you've forgotten, Lyra. Something you've lost. He looked at his sister, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and pity. I loved you, Lyra, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I still do. But I can't let you do this. I can't let you destroy everything. Lyra stared at him, her silver eyes flickering, her expression unreadable. The weight of their shared past, their broken bond, their conflicting ideologies, hung heavy in the air. It was a moment of reckoning, a moment where the heart, not brute force, would determine the outcome. The other wolves, sensing the shift in the dynamic, had stopped fighting, watching the siblings with a mixture of confusion and apprehension. The clearing was silent, save for the ragged breathing of the combatants, the tension thick and palpable. Lyra lowered her paw, her claws retracting, her expression softening slightly. She looked at Celine, lying wounded on the ground, then back at Lucian, his face a mask of pain and determination. I don't understand, she said, her voice trembling.
Why?
Why would you choose her? Why would you choose them? Because love is stronger than hate, Lyra, Lucian said. Because compassion is stronger than fear. Because the future is not written in stone. We can choose our own path. We can create a better world. He reached out and took Celine's hand, his touch gentle, reassuring. He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight, his body a shield against any further attack. Lyra looked at them, her silver eyes filled with a mixture of longing and regret. She saw the love between them, the bond that had been forged in the crucible of conflict, a bond that was stronger than any blood tie. And then she did something unexpected. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the forest, her pack following her, their howls fading into the night. The heart's reckoning had been made, and, for now at least, the battle was over. But the war, the struggle for the future, was far from finished. Chapter 20. A Love Forged in Eternity. The silence that descended upon the clearing after Lyra's departure was profound, a stark contrast to the cacophony of battle that had raged moments before. Celine, leaning heavily on Lucian, felt the adrenaline draining from her body, leaving her weak and trembling, the pain from her wounds throbbing with a dull ache. But beneath the pain, beneath the exhaustion, she felt a surge of relief, a sense of fragile hope. They had survived. They had won for now. Lucian gently helped her sit down on the moss-covered rock, his touch tender, his golden eyes filled with concern. He examined her wounds, his fingers tracing the gashes on her side and leg, his expression grim. We need to get you back to the cottage, he said, his voice hoarse. To tend to these. Celine nodded, her body aching, her mind still reeling from the confrontation with Lyra. She looked around the clearing, at the scattered remnants of the battle, at the silent trees that had witnessed the clash between siblings, between ideologies, between love and hate. She let us go, Celine said, her voice barely a whisper, still struggling to comprehend Lyra's unexpected retreat. Lucian nodded, his gaze fixed on the spot where his sister had vanished into the shadows. Yes, he said. She did. But I don't know why. I don't know what it means. He helped her to her feet, his arms supporting her weight, his body a warm, comforting presence against hers. They slowly made their way back to the cottage, each step a painful effort, their silence filled with unspoken questions, with uncertainty, with a fragile hope that refused to be extinguished. Once inside, Lucian tended to Celine's wounds with a practiced hand, cleaning and bandaging them with a gentleness that belied his fierce warrior nature. He brewed her a strong herbal tea, the familiar aroma calming her frayed nerves, easing the pain. As she sipped the tea, wrapped in a warm blanket, sitting by the fire, Celine looked at Lucian, her heart filled with a mixture of gratitude, of love, of awe. He had faced his sister, his own flesh and blood, to protect her, to defend their shared belief in a better future. He had risked everything for her, for their love. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "For saving me.
For everything."
He smiled then, a tired but genuine smile that reached his eyes, a smile that eased the knot of fear in her heart. "I would do anything for you, Celine," he said. "Anything." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, a silent pledge of devotion, of unwavering love. It was a connection that transcended words, a bond that had been forged in the crucible of conflict, a love that had blossomed in the shadow of darkness. They sat in silence for a long time, holding hands, their gazes locked, their hearts connected. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls, creating a sense of warmth, of safety, of intimacy. "What happens now?" Celine finally asked, her voice breaking the silence. Lucian sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly.
"I don't know," he said.
"Lyra, she's unpredictable. I don't know if she'll return. I don't know if she'll give up. But we won't give up, either," Celine said, her voice firm, her eyes filled with determination. "We'll keep fighting. For our future. For our love." Lucian nodded, his gaze meeting hers, his golden eyes reflecting her resolve, her unwavering belief in their shared destiny. "We will," he said. "Together." He leaned in and kissed her then, a gentle, tender kiss that spoke of love, of devotion, of a bond that could not be broken. It was a kiss that sealed their fate, a promise of a future where they would face whatever challenges came their way, together, hand in hand, heart to heart. As the first rays of dawn crept through the window, painting the sky with soft hues of pink and orange, Celine and Lucian stood together, watching the sunrise, their hearts filled with a fragile hope, a quiet determination, a love forged in eternity. The battle was over, but the war was far from finished. But they were ready, together, to face whatever the future held, their love their shield, their hope their guiding light. They would build their haven, not just for themselves, but for all who sought peace, for all who dared to dream of a better world. A world where shadows and light could converge, not in conflict, but in harmony. A world where love, not hate, would reign supreme. Epilogue. The years that followed were not easy. The threat of Lyra and her followers remained, a constant shadow lurking at the edges of their lives. There were skirmishes, close calls, moments of doubt and despair. But Celine and Lucian never wavered. Their love, forged in the crucible of conflict, deepened and strengthened, becoming a beacon of hope in a world shrouded in darkness. They built their haven, not just within the walls of Celine's cottage, but within the hearts of those who sought refuge from the violence and hatred that plagued the Loup-Garou world. Humans and werewolves, drawn to their vision of peace and coexistence, slowly began to gather around them, forming a small but resilient community, a testament to the power of love and understanding. Celine, embracing her dual heritage, became a bridge between the two worlds, a healer, a teacher, a leader. She used her knowledge of herbs and remedies to tend to the wounded, both human and wolf, her compassion and empathy easing their pain, mending their broken spirits. She taught the young ones, both human and Loup-Garou, about the importance of tolerance, of understanding, of respect for all living things. Lucian, his warrior spirit tempered by his love for Celine, became a protector, a guardian, a defender of their fragile peace. He trained the able-bodied, both human and wolf, in the arts of defense, preparing them for the inevitable confrontations with those who sought to destroy their haven. But he also taught them restraint, discipline, the importance of using their power wisely, of fighting only when necessary, of striving for peace whenever possible. Lyra never fully disappeared. She remained a constant threat, a reminder of the darkness that lurked within their own kind. There were occasional encounters, tense standoffs, moments where the fate of their community hung precariously in the balance. But each time, Celine and Lucian, supported by their loyal followers, managed to repel her attacks, to defend their haven, to protect their dream of a better future. One crisp autumn evening, many years after the night of the great battle, Celine and Lucian stood together on a small hill overlooking their community. The setting sun painted the sky with vibrant hues of orange, red, and purple, casting a warm, golden glow over the landscape. Below them, they could see the lights of the cottages and homes, hear the laughter of children playing, the sounds of families gathering for their evening meals. It was a scene of peace, of harmony, of a dream realized, a testament to their unwavering love, their courage, their resilience. Celine, her hair now completely silver, but her eyes still shining with the same fierce spirit, leaned against Lucian, her hand resting on his arm. His hair, too, showed streaks of silver, but his golden eyes still held the same warmth, the same unwavering devotion. "We did it," she said, her voice soft, but filled with a quiet pride. "We built our haven." Lucian smiled, his hand covering hers, his touch still sending a shiver of warmth through her. "We did," he said. "Together." He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a love that had endured the test of time, a love that had transcended the boundaries of species, a love that had conquered darkness and despair. "And it will last," he said, his voice firm, his gaze unwavering. "For as long as we have each other. For as long as we have love." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Celine and Lucian stood together, silhouetted against the fading light, their love a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of the human and wolf spirit. Their haven, built on a foundation of love, compassion, and unwavering courage, would stand the test of time, a legacy for generations to come. A testament of their moonlit oath.